Faleminderit gjithëve për pjesëmarrjen. Unë jam Bledi Zgjipali, drejtori ekzekutiv I Lëvizjes Europiane në Shqipëri. Kam kënaqësinë që së bashku të kemi këtë aktivitet sa I takon grupit punës numër 1, gjyqësorit dhe drejtat themelore, në kuadër të konventës kombëtare për integrimin evropian, cila është një iniciativë që zbatohet nga Lëvizja Europiane në Shqipëri së bashku me Shoqata Slovake për politikën e jashtme dhe në grupin e parë të punës, gjej rastin të falenderoj për bashkëpunimin Ministrinë e Drejtësisë, ku kjo është kryeza e tretë që realizojmë. Sigurisht është me rëndësi kapitulli 23 për faktin që bëm pjesë tek grupi kapitujve çështjeve themelore, që do të jenë dhe çështjet e para që do të negociohen me nisjen e negociatave për anëtarësinë e Shqipërisë në Bashkimin Evropian, por edhe ka dhe një rëndësi të veçantë për faktin që çështja e drejtësisë, reforma në drejtësi është një nga ato reformat më të rëndësishme që Shqipëria ka ndërmarrë në dekadat e fundit dhe shërben dhe si shembull mund të themi edhe për fusha tjera, faktin e thellësisë dhe gjerësisë të reformës, numrit ligjeve të prekura, numrit institucioneve të krijuara apo rikrijuara, gjë që merr një vlerë të veçantë ky kapitull pikërisht edhe për këto arsye. Siç e keni parë nga agenda, kemi kënaqësinë që në takimin e sotëm të kemi të ftuar kryesor zotin Radovan Gejst, I cili është kryeredaktor I Euroactiv Slovakisë, një media dedikuar çështjeve europiane, besoj të gjithë e njihni, shumë e rëndësishme dhe me shumë interes për të ndarë eksperiencët e tij pikërisht lidhur me kapitullin 23. Por pak më vonë do të jap fjalën për prezantimin e tij dhe do kemi mundësi të diskutojmë. Fillimisht dëshiroj të jap fjalën zonjës Elona Hoxha, e cila është drejtore e drejtorisë politikave dhe strategjive në fushën e drejtësisë, në Ministrinë e Drejtësisë, për të mbajtur gjithashtu një fjalë përshëndetëse të këtij aktiviteti dhe gjithashtu dhe për të nxjerrë disa pika të cilat do mund të më pas të diskutojmë në pjesën e hapur të sesionit. Zonja Hoxha, fjala është për ju. Faleminderit.
Faleminderit zoti Gjipali, I nderuar zoti Radovan Gejst, të nderuar pjesëmarrës, është një kënaqësi e veçantë për mua si përfaqësuese e Ministrisë së Drejtësisë të përshëndes në këtë takim virtual me fokus kapitulli 23, si një ndër shtyllat kryesore të procesit të negociatave drejt Bashkimit Evropian. Ministria e Drejtësisë, si institucioni lider në përgatitjen dhe koordinimin e procesit të negocimit për kapitullin 23 dhe kriterin politik, mbar kjo vetëm përgjegjësi, por në të njëjtën kohë edhe një sfidë të madhe për ta shtyrë përpara procesin e harmonizimit të legjislacionit me afërsinë e Bashkimit Evropian. Në cilësinë e Ministrisë përgjegjëse për hartimin e politikave publike në fushën e drejtësisë dhe antikorrupsionit, Ministria e Drejtësisë ka ndërmarrë një sër reforma shtëlbësore në drejtim të forcimit të sundimit të ligjit, të konsolidimit të shtetit ligjor dhe të së drejtës, të konsolidimit të demokracisë, në luftën kundër korrupsionit, si dhe në garantimin e lirive dhe të drejtave themelore të njerëzit. Sikurse ju të gjithë keni në dieni, Shqipëria po kalon një moment historik dhe të shumëpritur që ka të bëjë me reformimin e sistemit gjyqësor, me qëllim tashmë ngritjen e një modeli të ri drejtësie, të aksesueshëm për të gjithë, të pavarur, të paanshëm, profesional, por mbi të gjitha transparent. Këto reforma kanë ndikim të drejtë për drejtë në avancimin e agjendës tonë drejt integrimit evropian, por gjithashtu kontribuojnë thelbësisht në përmirësimin konkret të jetës së qytetarëve shqiptar, duke i siguruar atyre shërbime më të mira juridike, akses më të mirë në drejtësi, ndjekje dhe ndëshkim efektiv të rasteve të korrupsionit, e veçanërisht atë për të cilën të gjithë ne ndjemi përgjegjës për të krijuar besimin e qytetarëve në një drejtësi që vihet në shërbim të tyre. Tashmë reforma në drejtësi ka dhënë rezultatet e para tejet impresionuese. Kuadri ligjor I kësaj reforme është plotësuar pothuajse me të gjitha aktet nënligjore dhe arkitektura e re institucionale është ngritur dhe është funksionale. Në drejtim të luftës kundër korrupsionit, si një nga prioritetet kyçe të qeverisë shqiptare dhe një ndër komponentët kryesor të kapitullit 23, janë ndërmarrë hapa solid me qëllim ngritjen dhe funksionimin e mekanizmave që synojnë çrënjosjen e korrupsionit në sektorët më të ndjeshëm. Është ngritur rjeti koordinatorëve kundër korrupsionit, i përbërë nga profesionistë të rinj me integritet, të cilët do të angazhohen fuqimisht për mbledhjen, përpunimin dhe raportimin e çdo indicie të rasteve të dyshuara si korruptive, për të përcjellë më pas për shqyrtim në strukturat e specializuara në Ministrinë e Drejtësisë ose prokurorinë e posaçme sipas rastit. Në kuadër të kapitullit 23 dhe në vazhdim e nismave për zbatimin e standardeve të drejtave dhe lirive themelore, kemi pasur në fokus specifik të 3 vitet e fundit jetësimin dhe ngritjen e një sistemi të ndihmës juridike falas që ka në themel garantimin e standardeve më të mira të aksesit në drejtësi. Përmes rrethëzimit të ofrimit të ndihmës juridike nga qendrat e ndihmës juridike në gjithë Shqipërinë, OJF-ve të licencuara për të ofruar ndihmë juridike të financuar nga shteti, apo dhe klinikat e ligjit në institucionet e arsimit të lartë, platformës juristi online, kemi bindjen se tashmë kemi hedhur themelet e një drejtësie të qëndrueshme në garantimin e të drejtave dhe lirive themelore të qytetarëve. Jemi të vetëdijshëm se roli kyç në procesin e integrimit evropian ka dhe përfshirja e gjërë shoqërisë civile. Roli i tyre është i rëndësishëm në monitorim, konsultim dhe zhvillimin e këtij procesi. Procesi i negociatave, që përkthehet në negocimin e kapitujve të ASBE-s midis dy palëve, asaj europiane dhe atë shqiptare, kërkon përfshirjen e të gjithë aktorëve të shoqërisë, ku shoqëria civile e pajisur me kapacitete dhe ekspertizë do duhet të luajë rolin e saj monitorues dhe vlerësues, si dhe të jetë pjesë në këshillimin, diskutimin dhe informimin e kësaj faze. Për këtë qëllim, qeveria shqiptare nëpërmjet urdhrit 113 të datës 30/8/2019 për format e pjesëmarrjes, funksionimin dhe strukturën institucionale të platformës së partneritetit për integrimin evropian, ka krijuar këtë platformë e cila synon angazhimin gjithëpërfshirës të aktorëve të shoqërisë civile në sektorin privat, në komunitetin akademik, partnerë social, pushtetin vendor dhe aktorë të tjerë të interesit. Me anë të kësaj platforme, të gjithë aktorët e interesuar do të kenë mundësi të informohen, të këshillojnë dhe të monitorojnë procesin e negociatave. Për të realizuar këtë proces, kanë filluar tashmë të ngrihen tryezat e para të këshillimit për kapitujt e APUS. Për kapitullin 23, kjo tryezë tashmë është ngritur që për muajit shkurt 2020 dhe më konkretisht, lidhur me këtë tryezë mund të diskutojmë dhe më gjerë në sezonin e diskutimeve. Më lejoni të theksoj të nderuar se në kuadër të procesit të integrimit në Bashkimin Evropian, institucionet shqiptare kanë nevojë të dëgjojnë dhe shkëmbejnë eksperjenca me vendet e tjera, të cilat e kanë kaluar më parë fazën e negociatave dhe tashmë janë vende anëtare. Eksperjenca e këtyre vendeve, ndërto dhe e partnerëve slovak, janë një mundësi shumë e mirë ballafaqimi për vendet kandidate, si dhe mundësi referimi për të ardhmen tonë në Bashkimin Evropian. Meqense jemi të gjithë së bashku, gjej rastin të informoj se Ministria e Drejtësisë ka përfunduar në muajin maj procesin 1 vjeçar të punës për hartimin e paketës strategjike për fazën e dytë të zbatimit të reformës në drejtësi për vitet 21-25. Përgjatë gjithë këtij procesi, Ministria e Drejtësisë ka garantuar përfaqësimin dhe kontributin e secilit për institucioneve të sistemit të drejtësisë në përputhje me kompetencat e tyre ligjore dhe kushtetuese. Duke konsideruar se reforma në drejtësi është prioritet i rëndësishëm i qeverisë shqiptare, si dhe duke marrë në konsiderat rolin thelbësor të grupeve të interesit, Ministria e Drejtësisë ka nisur procesin konsultues lidhur me këtë draft paket dhe gjej këtu rastin të ftoj të gjithë anëtarët e shoqërisë civile të japin kontributin e vet me qëllim përmirësimin e këtij dokumenti strategjik. Në përfundim të fjalës time, dëshiroj të falenderoj përzemërsisht EMën si bashkëorganizatori i këtij aktiviteti, panelistin zoti Gejs që i bashkohet përpjekjeve tona për të vetë përmirësuar dhe për të përgatitur sa më mirë për hapat e rëndësishëm që na presin në kuadër të procesit të negocimit. Faleminderit.
Faleminderit zonja Hoxha për paraqitjen e disa nga çështjeve më të rëndësishme të cilat sigurisht edhe mund të diskutojmë më vonë, kontributi i shoqërisë civile, mënyrat se si mund kontribuoj po ashtu platforma partneritetit që është me interes të veçantë për angazhimin e grupeve të interesit, jo vetëm shoqërisë civile, po ashtu dhe eksperiencat të mira të deritanishme, si ato me ndihmën ligjore falas, cilat janë shumë pozitive dhe nxisin angazhim të mëtejshëm dhe të organizatave, grupeve tjera të interesit, duke parë që modele të tilla funksionojnë, ka dëshirë, ka vullnet mirë nga të dy palët, pra nga institucionet shtetërore dhe nga ato jo shtetërore, arrim të prodhojmë së bashku lëvizje pozitive që sigurisht ndihmojnë në procesin e integrimit evropian. Ju falenderoj edhe një herë gjithashtu për bashkëpunimin. Kam kënaqësinë tani të jap fjalën zotit Radovan Geist për prezantimin e tij, për fjalën e tij, disa çështje me interes nga eksperienca slovake, çfarë na bashkon, çfarë ka ndryshuar në këtë proces, sepse tashmë ka vite nga antarësimi i Slovakisë në Bashkimin Evropian. Por kjo na bën akoma dhe më të lehtë një vështrim retrospektiv se çfarë ka funksionuar, çfarë jo dhe se si mund të përfitojmë sa më shumë nga këto eksperienca. Zoti Geist, faleminderit që merrni pjesë, u bashkuat konventës, fjala është për ju.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the seminar, and also thank you to Ms. Hocha for the introduction. I will have a presentation, but let me start now without that on a more personal note, let's say. First of all, the structure of my presentation or the presentation is structured in, let's say, 4 parts. First of all,
dhe të është të theksoj rëndësine kapitulli 23 dhe kur flas të them kapitulli 23 gjithashtu përfshi edhe atë numër 24 i cili lidhet ngushtas me 23-shin së dyti në mënyrë praktikë se të përvoja slovake bisedimet afrimet të bëjnë nuk kanë përkatësime në rastin e Shqipërisë, do të përfishen.
It might be still relevant, and last but not least, I'll talk very briefly about media. That's the topic that we could discuss more than in the Q&A part, and I said I will talk about it briefly, not because it's not important, but it's because it's much more general and much wider than, let's say, topics related to chapters 23, 24, and the importance is actually greater than the importance of, let's say, the accession talks. So I'll talk about media only briefly. As I said, let me start with a kind of on a personal note. First of all, I would like to really congratulate you for opening the negotiations. It has been long overdue, also from the side of the European Union. So it's an important step. It's a start of a difficult path, and I would say the path will be probably longer and surely much more difficult than in case of Slovakia. But still, it's an important thing. Some years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, we have spent some weeks in southern Albania, in mountains around Gjirokastra, and I have to say, I haven't been in a country where I would have seen so many European flags everywhere, from public institutions to pubs in small villages up in the mountains. It was quite surprising for me, and it was definitely surprising for a friend of mine from France who said, this is not something you would see in France, such a level of pro-European feelings. So it's obvious that the support for the European integration in Albania is quite strong. And it's obvious not only because of the circumstantial evidence, it's also... is to I would say the situation in Albania is quite similar to what we had seen in Slovakia when we started our negotiations, accession negotiations in the late 1990s. As laws of the, let's say, Center European Group, for obvious reasons, we have been lacking in the democracy criteria. With the change of government, the situation has changed. I remember discussions at that time, National Convention, which was structured similarly as yours. I think it was in 2003, I was quite surprised to hear from the representatives of some of the, let's say, nationalist populist parties that nearly got us out of the European integration track, to say that now they are strongly pro-European. Everybody is strongly pro-European in Slovakia. So that was back in 2002 or 3. And the population was also quite enthusiastic. In fact, everybody knew, I mean, the main concern for the referendum, for the accession referendum in Slovakia was not how people would vote. The main concern was whether they would bother to vote. So we were more concerned with the participation than with the result. And it was actually quite close call. Just about 50% people participated on the referendum, so it was valid, legally valid. Now, why I'm mentioning this? It's because I think the support for integration in many accession countries in Central and Eastern Europe and in Southeastern Europe is usually very high, and that's both among public and at the level of political actors. But it could be very fragile, and that's something that we see now. EU membership, it's of course a rational choice, and I think it's the best of all available options for a country like Albania. At the same time, the support for EU membership also stands on, let's say, let's call it irrational expectations of change and projections of hopes. So many people support EU integration also because they believe that it will change the country and heal many ills that the country is facing. After some years as being member of the European Union, you find out that it's not so easy. It's much more difficult. So what do we see? What we observe quite often, and it's the case of Slovakia, but also other countries that have entered EU in 2004 and 2007, at the level of general population, there is a realization that the changes are not so quick and it's not so deep. And we can talk about economic and social situation. We can talk about effectiveness of public administration, rule of law, etc., etc. And it's not because of some faults on the side of the EU. It's because of, let's say, the way we are able to use the opportunities provided by the membership, but also because of unrealistic expectations back in 2003 and 4. So this leads to something like, let's call it membership fatigue. And then at the level of politicians or political actors, once you are part of the club, it's actually much easier and much cheaper, politically cheaper, to play with some Euroscepticism. So what you see in some years after you become a member is kind of a drop of, let's say, general support for the EU membership, or a general consensus on the importance of EU membership. Now I'm getting to the topic, which is chapter 23. I think issues related to the chapter, to the negotiations chapters 23 and 24 are fundamental for the future development of public and political consensus on, let's say, general support for EU membership. Issues like the rule of law, we can call it the fundamental fairness of the state, of public administration, fight against corruption and organized crime, respect for rights and liberties, especially for those groups that are most vulnerable, fight against discrimination, strength and independence of civil society, media, etc., etc. I think these issues are important factor for the future general, and I said also political opinion on the EU membership. Chapter 23 and 24 is crucial for the accession process, and we will talk about it more later. But I think it's also crucial for the transformation of the country. Transformation of the country, which is not an end in itself, but which is a means for changing the country in a way that you can reap the benefits of the membership and avoid some, let's say, risks or face challenges, successfully face challenges that would definitely come with the EU membership. So now I'll start my presentation because it has some points that kind of would help me to structure what I'm saying. I hope you can see it.
Yes, we see.
Okay, good, perfect. So as I promised, I'm starting with kind of a paradoxical part, and I'll try to explain you why the Slovak experience, specifically in chapters 23, 24, it was one chapter at our time, is not so relevant for Albania. And there are three groups of factors. The first one, let's call it first factor is these are trivial factors. EU has changed, especially in the area of justice and home affairs. We have new institutional architecture, new rules, meaning that we have no second and third pillar now. Of course, all legislation in justice and home affairs, I mean, it might require unanimity, which is usually not the case in other areas connected to common market and so on. But still, it's not. There is not such a clear distinction between the justice and home affairs and the rest of the European policies. So that's one thing. We have new institutions, and these are institutions that have strengthened the role of the EU in the rule of law area. So we have the European Public Prosecutor's Office, which has started just this month and should assist national prosecutor offices in those member states that have joined the enhanced cooperation to fight against crimes related to the financial interests of the EU, which is a very wide area covering things like the VAT fraud, customs frauds, and also, of course, also misuse of the European funds and agricultural payments. So it's a wide area, and it could become even wider because now we are talking about future new sources of the European budget. So once we have, for example, border carbon tax or customs paid by those importing steel, etc., and they are used to finance the European budget, it becomes a financial interest of the European Union. So the functioning of the carbon market could also be an area where the EPPO will be active in the future. If we have a source of financing based on the recycling of plastic waste, then this is again an area which becomes an area of financial interest of the EU. So the EU will play a role in maintaining, let's say, the rule of law, fighting against fraud in that area. So in future, it's quite possible that the role of the EPPO will increase. Of course, for those states that are part of the enhanced cooperation. Then there is another thing, another institutional rule, which is being discussed and which will be applied, I think, quite soon, from the end of next year at the latest. And that's the conditionality of European payments to the functioning rule of law. It's actually a direct answer to the situation in many so-called new member states, including Slovakia, where the Olaf office was pointing to many cases of corruption and misuse. and these have not been duly investigated and brought to courts and so on by the national systems. So one of the ways how to avoid it is to actually strengthen the conditionality of the functioning rule of law for accessing the European funds. Again, speaking very broadly, anything from agriculture payments, structural investment funds, to future instruments like the Next Generation EU that is supposed to help us overcome the corona crisis. Then we have the Article 7, again, a new instrument which hasn't existed back in 2004, and which gives, let's say, European institutions a nuclear bomb for fighting for the rule of law at the national level, with very strong, let's say, reservation that it's quite easy to prevent European institutions from using this instrument once you have two states that hold back to each other, like is the case of Hungary and Poland now. It's quite difficult to get to the final sanctions, which is a suspension of the membership rights in voting. But anyway, we have, as I said, new institutional architecture and rules, and the central role of the rule of law area in the EU as such. So these are the trivial factors. You will be entering a very different European Union, or different European Union than we have entered back in 2004, and it's natural because the EU integration has to react on internal and external pressures and changes. Second, there are institutional factors. First of all, the organization of the accession talks has changed twice. First in 2011, the next year, which I think changed the process quite substantially compared to the one that we have been facing at the beginning of the century. So now the negotiation chapters are clustered. So you are not just going chapter by chapter, but basically working on a cluster of chapters. Second, and that's even more important, the chapters 23 and 24, which previously was only one chapter, they have increased, the importance of their role has increased. And I think we can say that now they play a central role in the accession negotiations. And this is supported first by formal rules, like unless you close the chapter 23, you cannot close other chapters and so on. But it's also, and I think it will be quite obvious in the negotiations. It will be also seen by the importance that it's given by existing member states and the European institutions to these chapters. This was not the case back in our time. Of course, reform of judiciary was important precondition. Fight against corruption was also important. But I mean, to be honest, or anti-discrimination, but to be honest, at our time, the benchmarking relied much more on, let's say, input criteria. So you had to do some reform, you had to adopt some law or change a law or create an institution, which is, I mean, as long as you have majority in parliament, as long as you have government which supports the integration process, it's quite easy. Now, what you will have, and that's the case also with Serbia and Montenegro and Northern Macedonia, is a much wider spectrum of benchmarks, and some of them are also, let's call it, output benchmarks. So you will have to achieve some results, not only formal changes, but also results in terms of corruption cases, even politically sensitive corruption cases being investigated, etc., etc. So this is, I would say, from this point of view, the chapter 23 and also 24 will be back in our time. During our accession process, it was just one of the chapters. Now it's the chapter for the negotiations. And last but not least, there is a reform structure for the accession negotiations in chapters 23 and 24. We actually now, besides the benchmarks that you are supposed to fulfill to open the accession talks and then to close them in the chapter, there are also some interim benchmarks, and these are quite important and also quite extensive. If I'm not mistaken, in 2011 or 12, probably it was in 2012, when Montenegro received these interim benchmarks for the chapter 23 and 24, the total number of these benchmarks was equal to all the benchmarks for all the other chapters in the accession negotiations. So, I mean, you are talking about, in that case, I think it was more than 80 benchmarks that are very diverse, as I said, from reforms to, and reforms meaning not only formal changes, but also some kind of action plans that are fulfilled, up to output benchmarks like real evidence of corruption cases or organized crime being prosecuted and so on. So from this point of view, the negotiations for these chapters will be much more complicated and much longer than it was in our case, or the case of 2004 and 7 enlargements. In fact, first signs that the situation is changing were obvious already in 2004 and 7. I mean, our group of countries was quite lucky because we were only supposed to fulfill very formal criteria, and the negotiations in chapter at the time 23, I think it was quite quick. Romania and Bulgaria faced much more difficult situation, and you know that after they have actually formally closed the negotiations and became member, there was still some kind of monitoring process that would allow European institutions to suspend payments quite quickly if they don't show that the reform, fighting against corruption and so on, is continuing even after the accession. And that, I think, has been then transformed to the reforms of the accession negotiations as such as that I was describing now. So these are the institutional factors, and this leads us to the last group of factors why the situation is very much different than the one that we have facing, and that's the political climate. Of course, now. When we talk about Western Balkans and the enlargement of the EU, we quite often hear about the enlargement fatigue. I think it's just kind of a general label that we use to describe a different set of factors and developments. Some are internal, meaning they are related to the existing member states or EU as such. It's obvious that EU has to reform to be able to integrate even greater number of members, even if we are talking about smaller countries like the Western Balkans and not big ones like Ukraine. So EU needs to change, and the change in the EU is slow and complicated. And let's see what will happen during the conference on the future of Europe. But still, we need to do these changes. Unless we solve this, I think the readiness of the EU to accept new countries will be much lower. And then there are problems related to individual countries, individual member states, where let's say that the political parties or political discussion often finds a scapegoat for many internal problems in the accession countries. So if you have a problem with organized crime, you are not blaming your institutions for inability to fight it, but you are blaming some countries where the people that are partly involved in these activities are coming from, and this is, I think, let's say, this has a strong influence on the readiness of the EU to accept new countries, and that's the internal part of the enlargement fatigue. But there is also external part which is related to candidate countries, and of course, supposedly Iceland changes its mind and opens or reopens the accession talks I think the process will be quite swift because it's already to a large extent part of the internal market, and the rules and institutions are not so different. But now we are talking about countries where the situation is more different from the rest of the EU. So of course, the integration process and the readiness to accept these countries is lower. But as I said, let's say enlargement fatigue, it's a complex issue, but one thing unites these internal and external factors, and it's the fact that they are to a large extent based on the lessons learned from the 2004 and 7 enlargement. And some of these lessons are, for example, that formal changes aren't sufficient. As I said, you can create institutions or adopt laws, but this will not change the way the system is working by itself. And institutions and laws could be undermined in the future. I will talk about it a little bit later.
Istituzione che garantisce democracia liberale della sua indivisione British.
Is a group of liberal democracies with the rule of law, with the functioning rule of law institutions. Of course, now we have different tendencies, but I think if the development in countries that say that they want to create something else than liberal democracy continues, it will either change substantially EU or it would lead those countries out of the EU in one way or the other. So institutions that guarantee the liberal democracy and rule of law are fragile, and the so-called Europeanization, or let's say, reform of the institutions and laws inspired by the European Union and member states. So the so-called Europeanization is not some kind of natural consequence of the EU membership or the accession process. It needs much more, and one of the things that we need, that it needs, is sustained internal support for these reforms. So you might say that it was actually us who had spoiled the party in the EU, and you might be right. So now you hear quite often voices, let's say in quote unquote older member states, saying that the EU enlargement in 2004 and 7 was probably a little bit too hasty, and that's the lesson that we should learn for the future enlargements. So that's one of the let's say political factors or factors of the change of political climate. And then the second factor, which is even more important for our focus area, is that the EU, I think, gave a second thoughts on the importance of the rule of law. Now, if you talk to politicians or experts in the area, they would probably say that the importance of rule of law was underestimated.
There's no story Mas čodrnīgā fusat hyrjes access Portani which is such ninga first summer decision just a premier decision tomorrow they check it on Safari Asiatian Empress Gjithashtu ndika se si vendi në fjalë I përdor mundësitë që ofrohen dhe I përballë sfidat. Dhe gjithashtu ndikon rolin e vendit në fjalë. Rolin që ky vend luan. Pra, siç mund shikoni, ky rol mund të jetë konstruktiv ose destruktiv. Por unë mendoj që kjo është pjesa e dytë, që është shumë më ndryshe në nivel politik, pra, se mund të ketë qenë të krahasoj me vitin 2004. Sondimi I pra si specifika kyçe që tregon nëse vendi është apo jo gati për të antar PPS. Kjo nuk mbështetet në kriteret formale ose standardet formale, por detectă perceptivi politici, benchmark, se să cum vede se rezultati sai, per leadul,
the accession process for countries like Albania, but also other Western Balkan countries that are not members of the EU yet, will be much more difficult and probably longer than it was in 2004 and 2007, or for the countries that entered the EU in 2004 and 2007. About that, chapters 23 and 24, so rule of law, anti-discrimination, etc., etc., they will play a fundamental role, and the emphasis there in these chapters will not be only on the formal criteria, but also on political criteria and the perception benchmarks. So it's not only about changes that they introduce, but also what comes next. So you can create an institution, but how it works. And you can actually observe it better than in Slovak case in countries like Serbia or Montenegro, that they have opened these chapters a long time back. I think it was more than 5 years back for Serbia, and even longer for Montenegro. They have adopted laws and created institutions, but then the implementation is slow and difficult. And I think it's for 3 years now that, at least in case of Serbia, the Commission is repeating again and again that there is no positive movement forward in the chapter 23 and chapter 24. And again, these play a central role for the whole accession process, so they are actually holding back the accession process for the country. So this was the summary why the Slovak experience might not be so relevant for Albania, but actually we can say that, okay, this I have already talked about. We can say also a few words on why it might be relevant, and don't be scared only because there is much less text here. These are only just few notes. I think there are ways how or where Slovakia could inspire or be an inspiration for Albania, but to be honest, not by its successes, but rather by its failures. Let me start with something a little bit more general or philosophical. I believe that the EU membership is not an end itself. I think it's just a catalyst of positive transformation. It's a tool for changing the country, an important tool, and I think a tool which doesn't have a viable alternative now for a country like Albania. It might have alternative for a country like Iceland, but not for a country like Albania, which is positioned differently geographically, politically, etc. So it's an important tool, but it's only a tool. It's not an end in itself. And as I said, EU membership opens new priorities, brings new opportunities, brings new challenges, but it's up to a country how it's able to use them. And when I say that Slovak experience could provide an inspiration, I mean it exactly in this way. It could help you to avoid the failures that we have made in the integration process, and specifically in the area of the rule of law. And also it could help you to enact, let's say, deeper changes that would bring the positive transformation of the country. And just to conclude this general part, I believe it's important for two things, for two reasons. First reason is related to the accession process. As I said, in your case, the rule of law area will be under much stricter oversight than it was in our case. And again, it's not only oversight over the formal changes that we will do to your institutions, reform to judiciary and so on, but also to how these reformed institutions work. And when I say how they work, there are no, I mean, it might be sometimes difficult to set, let's say, objective criteria. So you rely on, let's say, political criteria or political discussion about the effect of the changes, but also on the perception criteria, like when we talk about corruption, okay, I mean, it might be quite difficult to measure the level of corruption. You could measure it by the level of cases investigated or prosecuted. But what does it mean if you have high number of cases or a low number of cases? I remember we used to have an interior minister not so many years back who said that there is no high level corruption in Slovakia because there are no cases involving high level politicians. Well, it only needed 2 years and a change of government to have some cases like that, and the number is growing, and actually the people being prosecuted are or were in higher and higher positions. So so if you say that there are no cases prosecuted, is it good or bad? If you have high number of cases prosecuted, is it good or bad? And then the perception of corruption in Slovakia, you can see actually the trend of increased perception of corruption. And this could mean two things. First, yes, we have more corruption than we used to have, maybe. Second, it could mean also that people are more sensitive to the cases of corruption, from very everyday corruption at doctor's place or whatever, to high-level political corruption. So this is important, and I think it makes discussions about your, let's say, about your success in chapter 23, 24, much more political than it was in our case. So this is the first reason why it's important. It's related to the accession process. Second, it's related to the membership as such. And I think the well-functioning rule of law, I mean, working fight against corruption, organized crime, etc., it's crucially important for guaranteeing a fair distribution of benefits and costs related to the EU membership, because accession and the membership processes are transformations, changes, and as any changes, they have their winners and their losers, and sometimes never are the benefits and costs distributed equally. But you can try to manage this distribution in a way that it's not, if it's not equal, so at least it's equitable. So there is some kind of fundamental fairness, and for this, I think the area of the rule of law is really important. So, what are the Slovak lessons that you can learn and use in your experience? First of all, I think, especially when it comes, I mean, this is general about the changes and accession process, but it's specifically related also to the rule of law and other related areas. You should get rid of the running race mentality. I mean, if you look at the accession process with the way how it's organized, with the chapters being open and closed, with deadlines, with benchmarks, and so on, it easily creates a perception of some kind of a running race. And the running race has something which is kind of a predefined finishing tape. Once you cross it, it's all solved. You are a winner or you are a loser. That's not how it works, I believe, and that's the Slovak experience. We thought of the accession process as some kind of a running race. For maybe some good reasons, we had to catch the train. We were 2 years late in the process. We wanted, there was a real risk that we will not be part of the 2004 enlargement. So we were really like racing ahead. Which also meant that the whole process was more technocratic. There was not much involvement of stakeholders or public, let's say, discussion with public or communication with public was more superficial, focusing on like underlining the benefits of the EU integration, not discussing what do we want to do once we are members of the EU, or why do we want to be members of the EU. So, and I think this kind of running race mentality is wrong and creates problems for the future. I think, I don't know if some of you are fans of Dungeons and Dragons. I used to play Dungeons and Dragons for years. It's a role-playing game, and I think accession process is more like a Dungeons and Dragons quest. So you solve one task and it opens new tasks, and you are part of the story that is being developed. And there is no kind of finishing tape that you can cross and the problems are solved. I mean, you just go on with your quest. So this is, I think, important. This is something where Slovakia has failed, and it was felt immediately after we have entered the EU. In two ways. First, it was at the level of public discussion. I mean, everybody wanted to be a member, or everybody supported our EU membership. Once we have entered the EU, there was nothing to discuss. I mean, we were not ready for the discussions that were already ongoing in the EU, how to reform the EU, how to change it, why we should change it, and in what areas. So that's the first thing. And second thing, which is even more important when it comes to the rule of law, is, let's say, continuous support for reform. I mean, we have made some changes up till the 1st of May 2004. After that, the support and actually also the interest of public and also party politicians for those changes have dropped. I mean, we have fulfilled what we wanted. Okay, after EU, we wanted to enter Schengen. Okay, so we had to do some change with the border management. Then we had to, or we wanted to enter the Eurozone. Okay, so we changed some things in the area of public finance, etc. But still, these were the finishing tapes. Once we were there, it was over for us. And this is not how it works. And I think many problems that we have now are caused by the fact that the support for continuous reform has waned after we crossed this finishing tape of the EU membership. And I think you should avoid that. It's quite dangerous. So that's the first thing. Second important thing is that you should forget about building up support of the EU membership. I think now in public polls, like 90-something% of people in Albania support EU membership. That's wonderful. It's really difficult to get higher than that. But I wouldn't be so much bothered if it's 70%. It's not a big problem. And it's definitely not a big problem once you become a member of the EU. What is much more important than, kind of trying to lighten up the image of the EU and trying to convince the population that the EU membership is really a positive thing, which is much more important, I think, is to involve civil society, stakeholders, public as such, as much as possible in the whole process. And when we talk about the rule of law area, this also, we are touching upon sometimes very sensitive things like the political pressure on judiciary and influence on judiciary. Discussions could be quite critical there from the, let's say, NGOs that care about transparency and so on, fight against corruption. But these discussions are really important. If you don't have them, if you really rely on formal changes and building up, let's say, general support for EU membership, again, you are creating problems for the future. To avoid mistakes that we have made in our accession process, first, vis-a-vis stakeholders, I'm talking generally about stakeholders from those that are part of the sector that you are reforming, judiciary and so on, up to NGOs, civil organizations, media and so on. So the crucial is involvement in the processes, formal and informal let's say, platforms to discuss the changes, and on the part of the government also readiness to take I mean, suggestions from those stakeholders, because if they only go there and talk and then nothing happens, it's not gonna work. So openness on the part of the government, that's very important. And when it comes to the public, it's transparency. I think it's more beneficial in the long term to be 100% transparent, saying that yes, these are the changes that we have to do. These changes might complicate some things and might solve the other things, and might necessitate even further changes in the future. So this is the involvement. Involvement is much more important than just the general support. And then the third point, where you can take inspiration from, not again our success but our failure, is that when we are talking about the rule of law, of course, you have to guarantee the independence of judiciary, of police, etc., state attorney's office, but this independence has to go hand in hand with responsibility. So you have to build internal control mechanisms in these institutions. These are very important. And then the last point, to get to the close of my presentation, is the corruption. I think fighting corruption is of crucial importance, because it's a difficult task. I believe in let's say our part of the world, corruption is not just some failure, it's integral part of the system. So you have to really change the system of distribution of public resources, from financial to offices, etc., of how the institutions work, and so on. It's a difficult and long process, but I think it's a top priority. If you do formal changes and still allow corruption to function, I think it will undermine those changes in the midterm. And this is what has happened in Slovakia. It has undermined the functioning of police, of judiciary, and also state attorney's office. And we are actually now going through the process of new reform of all these institutions, a process that we could have done years back, but we are doing it now. Okay, so now going to the last point, and that's the role of media. As I said, media have, I think they are crucially important. They are important for the transparency, involvement, engagement. So those things that I said are important for the accession, but I think they are their importance is much wider for, let's say, overall reform of the country. When we talk specifically about the accession process, I believe, and it might sound paradoxical because I'm coming from Euractiv, which is like a European network with headquarters in Brussels, but I think that reporting of what is happening at home connected to your accession process might be even more important than reporting on what is happening in Brussels, quote unquote. Of course, these worlds are not separated. I mean, there are strongly connected, but the thing is that the EU membership, the accession process and the membership then is an internal political thing. It's not something external. Usually it's seen like that because it's managed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but this is not an external policy, it's internal policy. So that's why I think it's important to strengthen the role of media, or the position of media for the accession process and then for future once you become a member. But there is also a more pessimistic part. First of all, I think many problems that the media are facing now are larger than the solutions that the EU membership or EU as such could provide. First of all, there is a general crisis of media. It's not only in our countries, it's everywhere in Europe, let's say. I don't think you have a country in Europe which could say that our media sector is vibrant, it's growing, and it doesn't face any problems. We don't have solutions. It's good that the EU has started to look at it, and to search for solutions, because I do believe that if there are any tools that could solve this, those cannot be national, they have to be international. But we are at the very beginning of the process. And in the meanwhile, media are dying economically and so on. So that's the first point. Second point, accession process and membership does not solve the main factors behind this crisis. So the concentration of ownership and control, even if you become a member, nothing will happen with that. You have member states where the concentration of ownership and control in the hands of people that are connected to politics or directly active in politics. Look at Czech Republic, or look at what was happening in Italy a decade back. It's really high. So this is nothing. This is not a problem that the EU membership will solve. Commercialization of media and market pressures. Again, I mean, this is not something that that the EU membership will solve, and especially in small markets like Albania, also Slovakia, this creates an immense pressure for media, and it's really hard for them to survive and to invest sufficient resources to objective, independent, quality reporting, especially on the minority issue like the EU. And last but not least, the crisis of standard business model and the role of digital social media like Facebook and so on. Again, it's influencing the media sector negatively, I think, but this is not something that EU could solve. I mean, again, EU is only starting to look at the ways how to deal with that, but we are at the beginning of a long road. There are some opportunities, and that's the last point that I will make for media. First, the accession process creates benchmarks and structures political discussion, and I think it's you could beneficially use it, or media could beneficially use it. It's actually easier in the accession process to hold public state institutions accountable for their failures, because you have benchmarks that you can compare to. You have deadlines that should be fulfilled and so on. So I mean, I think it makes the life of media when it comes to let's say transparency and control a little bit easier. Second, and that's just the general point, it's a cooperation, and I think accession process and the membership creates or opens more avenues for cross-border cooperation of media, and I think that's the future for European media. And I'm talking about media from really local small media up to national media, because now politics is not national, it's transnational, European to a large extent. Of course, national is still important, but it's the importance of these transnational, cross-national issues, solutions, discussions is growing, and also, and I believe media should react on that. I mean, to have somebody writing for you in each and every European capital, it's only possible for large media houses. But to have a network of cooperators or partners, that's something that you can use. And with the use of digital communication, it's much easier, faster, and cheaper than it would or was, let's say, 20 years back. That's where I finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Geist. It was very, very interesting, wide-reaching of the different points of the integration process. It was interesting also to highlight what should we not do during this process, and it is very important because often we hear what should we do many times. And it is very interesting to see it from the other way around. What can we avoid in this process, which is very demanding? It changes. It's very dynamic. It changes. There are differences. We cannot measure our progress or not with the same tools of 15 years ago, and it also makes us think about the process, what it could be in the next 5 or 10 years when we would join the EU, hopefully, if everything goes in the right direction. And also the need how we can interact different interest groups and media, which is very important, as you mentioned, that in this time we've seen a lot of different crises, and also it includes the media. And we have seen it in different countries, new member states, if we can still call it this way, the Big Bang enlargement, but also countries who are in the process. We in the Balkans, of course, have many problems related to the media, not only the transformation and the way how the media was during the communist regime, and how this profession was shaped, and the transformation into the economy and on the competition, which is often more of a threat than an opportunity, especially in small countries like ours. But I thank you for there were a lot of topics. I cannot make let's say a complete overview of what you say. There are different topics which we will take from this meeting and think about it. Very interesting. So it's now I'd like to open the floor for all the speakers. We already have a question or comment. I don't know. We have it in Albanian. If the translator could please translate it for Mr. Geist, and then we will continue it. The floor is open for everyone.
So, Mr. Geist, you said that most importantly are the internal news and the news produced or reported from Brussels, but from the journalistic institutions are more ready to respond to the media interest with regard to the integration process compared to the national authorities or Albanian authorities. Likewise, there exist all of the problems that you mentioned. For example, Slovakia and Albania do not have the same approach towards or vis-a-vis the media. You spoke about the strengthening of the role of the media, but under these circumstances, what needs to be done, what must be done, and let me go. How could we detach the media from just playing the role of conveying the news that they receive? And hereby I refer to the ready-made news from the public officials or state authorities in the case of Albania. So how to detach this role of just a transmitter and not news producing to the proper role of the media, to the newsworthy production. I don't know how, if Slovakia has had any similar experience on this, always referring to the process of information with regard to the integration process. So this was a kind of a long question, and I explained.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the first part, I think you're right, and this was also Slovak's experience, that the EU institutions were more ready to respond. That's fine. That's just a source of information. When I was saying that it's more important to report on what is happening in Albania, this could also include how it's reflected by EU institutions. This could create, I think, a useful benchmark or comparison or fact-checking sometimes for the information you get from a national institution. So yes, of course, it's very, very important to use those sources, and we shouldn't only talk about let's say, official European institutions, European Commission or Parliament or individual MEPs, because some of them are more active in the Western Balkans and so on. These sources are important, but also, let's say, other stakeholders in Brussels that follow the process of the enlargement and follow what's happening in your country. And it could be anything from trade unions to economic groups to NGOs that are international, Transparency International and so on. So these Brussels sources, let's say, are crucial. They are important. They could be used, but I think they could help you to report better on what's happening in Albania, because in a sense, the accession process and being a member of the EU means that, first of all, whatever is happening in the EU is also important, interesting for Albania, because it will influence Albania back. But it also works vice versa. So whatever is happening in Albania, especially once you become a member of the EU, will have an influence on the EU as such, on Brussels. So now, 20 years back, I don't think that anybody would follow elections in Poland or Hungary or any other country with such a great interest. Now, talking about Paris or Berlin or Copenhagen, I mean, they wouldn't dedicate them so much space in media. Now they do, because they know that anything happens in Hungary or Slovakia or Czech Republic or wherever will have indirectly or directly effect on the whole of the EU, and it will affect also their countries. So that's the first part. I fully acknowledge what you said, and in fact, this is how Euractiv has been working for a long time. That we were using resources resources meaning information sources from the EU, and putting them in contrast or comparing them with the situation in Slovakia, and I think it helped us to increase the quality of our reporting, and this leads me to the second question or second point. It's a discussion that we are also having here in Slovakia. I mean, what is the role of media? And now let's talk about public media, or those media that want to play some kind of a public role. I'm not talking about commercial media and so on. So what's their role? When you ask the politician, quite often you would hear that he or she thinks that media are just, as you said, interlocutors. I mean, they just, they are just a platform for publishing his or her positions, news, and so on. So it's basically a tool for political PR. I don't think it's the case. I mean, of course, media should report on what's happening, but they should do it in a critical way. So they have to judge what is important. They have to try to uncover the story behind the official rhetorics. They should compare what says the one side and the other side and so on. Now, how to achieve this? We are all living in the capitalist system, for better or worse, which means that resources are crucial. I mean, as long as you have human resources, which also means as long as you have financial resources, you can do it. You can invest in the quality of your news. If you have one journalist covering the EU plus some other area in newspapers, which is often the situation in Slovakia, I mean, you can forget about kind of quality in-depth reporting. And basically, it's only about kind of republishing with some changes the official news. Yeah. And that's not journalism, it's just PR. We haven't solved this in Slovakia, how to kind of find resources for investing in quality journalism. And as I said, the problems in Slovakia or small markets like Slovakia, Albania, are even more acute than in larger countries, but they are also facing their problems. If you have asked me this question, let's say 5 years back, or maybe 7 years back, I would be much more skeptical. I would say that basically we only have tabloid media, which do not provide any kind of quality journalism. They do not fulfill that role of media. Then you have commercial media, which have some kind of political reporting, but it's not very quality. I mean, journalist career is not something you do for your life. It's a step towards a well-paid job in the PR department of a large company or public institution. So, I mean, it's difficult to invest in those people. And then you have public media, which means basically public TV and radio. Important, but constantly under pressure. So this would have been my answer 7 years back. Now I'm a little bit more optimistic, and for several reasons. One is that we have actually seen that we can get to a situation where, let's say, political class would create intentionally, let's say, an open and free space for public media, and in case of Slovakia, I'm talking about TV and radio, to fulfill their role. We had a time of, let's say, 3 to 4 years where the quality of journalism and reporting in Slovak public broadcaster, TV and radio, has really increased. Then later they came under pressure, but at least it has created some benchmark, saying that, look, we can do this that well. It had also helped to raise a generation of young journalists that see journalism not as a step in the career, but as a public service, as something they want to do for their life, and they want to build a career there. And now, I mean, as I said, public broadcaster was again under some kind of a pressure. Many journalists have left, especially TV, but they have left for other media, and they are continuing with their projects there. So the situation has also has been, let's say, is a little bit better, and I'm a little bit more optimistic. And then talking about private media, now it's mostly newspapers and online media. Again, a few years back, the sector has been dominated by large newspapers that were mostly owned by either foreign investors or, let's say, kind of financial oligarchy groups from Slovakia and Czech Republic. One of our largest dailies is actually owned by a company which is, despite formal changes, owned by the Czech Prime Minister and his Agrofert holding. Okay, so this was the situation a few years back. There was a very negative trend when these, let's say, oligarchs and financial groups with political interests in Slovakia have increasing their ownership in the media sector, buying new newspapers, TVs, and actually crowding out foreign investors. Now, in this case, I think foreign ownership of media in Slovakia was not the worst thing. I mean, for some of them, it helped to sustain their independence. But these foreign investors were leaving, and they are still leaving. So for some, there was a moment of, let's say, 5 years when they were crowded out by Slovak oligarchs and financial groups. But this has led to a backlash. And now we have several new, let's say, projects started by journalists that have left those media, started their own outlets, print or online or whatever. They had to find new business models, and some of them were very successful. And now what we see is an opposite development. So we see that at least some of those oligarchs and financial groups are leaving Slovak media and selling them back to whatever, foreign investors, investment funds, and so on, because in fact, once the media was perceived as under influence of whatever financial group, its relevance has decreased, and it was difficult for them to hire high-quality journalists and so on and so forth. So it was not a valuable investment financially and politically. I'm far from saying that we have solved this problem with media. I think it's a long fight, and we haven't even started talking about the role of digital social media. And I have to say that up to now, this role is more negative than positive in the media sector, but at least I see a glimmers of hope. And I have to say I'm a very pessimistic person in general, but I see a glimmers of hope.
Thank you, Mr. Geist. Very interesting, because media is something that it's important not only to journalists, but to all of us. So of course, it takes a lot of efforts to try to address this issue. Yes, the floor is open. We can have more questions or comments. Fjala është për ju, nëse keni komente apo pyetje në të dy gjuhët apo nëpërmjet chatit. Mund kemi edhe disa minuta, kemi dalë pak jashtë orarit, por mundet edhe disa minuta.
Maybe may I have one question for whoever wants to take floor? I'm sorry, I was not present at the start of the meeting. I just some organizational issues from my side, but maybe you have talked about it. If yes, just say it. Have you? I mean, do you already have kind of a national structure or system of consultations of state institutions with stakeholders, NGOs, and so on for different accession chapters? I mean, is it this kind of national convention the main format, or there is also something else? That's one thing. And then the second thing is, do you have some kind of national initiative? Now I'm talking more about funding. For strengthening or supporting the role of media in reporting about the EU and the changes related to the EU accessions in Romania, in Albania. So, do you already have some kind of grant system or something that would support media in this role?
Yes, I can answer, because I'm dealing with both of these issues. Regarding the consultations, we have different tools. The first one, which is now more than 5 or 6 years old, is the National Council on European Integration, but this is attached to the Parliament. And it includes civil society and other interest groups like chambers of commerce or workers' associations. But it's, let's say, on the political level, on the more general on the process, which means that it's very limited in its scope of consultations. Generally, there are discussed main reports or main steps in the process at the general level. And because there are members of the parliament included in it, they always, let's say, steal the show. It's always about some political debate, so it's very difficult for other interest groups to jump in and to make a case. Then there is the platform. Now it's a new instrument. The director Hoxha mentioned it, that the Ministry of Justice has already established it, and we have jointly organized such meetings with the convention, and it's called the Partnership Platform on New Integration Process. And this is shaped according to the chapters, to the 33 chapters, but it's not fully established, although it's 2 years now from the legal basis. approved, but some of the ministries have established it, some are still establishing it. Of course, COVID-19 played a deterrent role because of shortcomings in meetings and in prioritizing what's most important. But I think that there are enough, also the convention, which we are already now in the second phase of it. There are enough tools to organize the consultation process, but hopefully we are waiting for the first intergovernmental conference to take place, so we practically start the accession talks. Because we have the political yes, but we still haven't started together with North Macedonia. So I think at the moment that the process starts, then we will have more meetings, more consultation, and that will be also the time that the public administration understands fully the role of the consultation and the feedback that they can use in their daily work. So that is a win-win process. It's not one-sided, just to allow access to non-state stakeholders. Mm-hmm. Now, regarding the media, unfortunately, there is not such a support regarding EU issues. It's very difficult, and we see it as an organization we deal a lot with journalists on EU issues. It's something that it's difficult for the journalists to be specialized in one issue, and especially EU issues. They have to cover different topics all the time. We have, which is a positive thing, a lot of medias in Albania for a small country. We have 70 TV stations, which is a lot for a country of 3 million people. Let's say there are more than 20 of them are news TV stations, which are 24 hours transmitting news. And so there is a lot of demand for news and information, etc. But the lack of specialization and deep coverage or reporting, thoughtful reporting, it's very visible. There are some project-based support but it's more from Brussels, coming with regional projects. Coming from Brussels, supporting investigative media or reporting media, but are very, very limited. We don't have, let's say, at national level support for journalists or young journalists on EU-related or EU integration issues. And I say that this is a shortcoming because we know that the process is complicated. There is one side, we have to explain what happens in Brussels, what are the institutions, their interaction, what is their role in the process, and on the other hand, to match the process with daily life in Albania. What are the laws that are changing because of this process, how these laws affect us, how these institutions will affect us now and in the future. So there's a lot of gaps and spaces which are needed to be filled to have a better informed society. Sometimes you mention the figures, and we are proud, let's say, of them, that 90% of Albanians support the integration process, but this is also accompanied by lack of information, and this has the danger to bring false expectations on the process. You already mentioned it, that you imagine that the EU will change everything, but it's not the way it works. You need to work every day to change it every day and to work on the reforms.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I mean, related to that, what we have realized is that when it comes to public support for EU integration, well, EU is not a washing powder. It doesn't need advertisements. So that's not the way how you build up sustainable support. Surprisingly, it's not even the function of, let's say, general information level about how the EU works. I mean, when people know better number of MEPs, who is the president of the European Commission and so on, it doesn't necessarily mean that they would in the future support integration process. I'm quite sure that a large percentage of people in Slovakia doesn't know how the laws are adopted in Slovakia. They do not know the process, but it's not undermining the legitimacy of, let's say, the national parliament as an institution. So it's not a level of information. Here, I think really the engagement and participation are crucial, and debates that are not technical but are more political. I'm not a big fan of this kind of saying that you have to explain people what good the EU brings to their everyday lives. I don't think this is the case. I think you need to engage people in the discussion about where the EU should go, or what should it do, what problems should it solve, and so on. And then once you feel you are part of the solution, part of the process, I think it's easier to accept a solution which is not 100%, I mean, which is not just like you want it to be, but it's, some kind of a compromise. But you have to be part of the process.
Yes, that's true. But even more, especially after you are part of EU. For the moment, we have more a passive approach. What is bringing to us, what is coming up to the country or the region, and that also has difficulties to explain that what's the role that we should play as part in this process.
Well, yes, I mean, this accession process is called a partnership, but it's very unequal partnership, obviously.
Yeah.
It's not the EU who wants to enter Albania, but Albania who wants to enter the EU. It was
even the negotiations are a one-way process. Yes. You have to meet all the. You don't negotiate. You negotiate only the time. You have to meet all the.
But there are some changes that could be done in different ways. Reforms that could be done in different ways, and I think this is something that needs to be discussed. And even, I mean, discussion could sometimes mean explanation why we have to do it in this or that way. But explanation which is not only based on kind of saying that EU wants it. Explanation based on what it will bring, why it's good, where it creates potential problems, and so on. I mean, transparency and openness. We haven't done it. We really haven't done it. I mean, in Slovakia, it was a very technical process. As you said, one-way process. Slovak institutions were accepting whatever they had to, except for very few politically controversial issues. Everything was quickly adopted. When I'm talking about controversies, it's like things like, I don't know, anti-discrimination legislation, Christian Democrats were against, and so on. But anyway, we have adopted it at the end. Now, if you look at Slovakia, you see that many of those changes were very formal. For some vulnerable groups, the situation is not much better in Slovakia than it was 20 years back or 15 years back. And media, rule of law, I mean, we are now, if you are probably not following the situation in Slovakia, but if you look at the rule of law institutions now, so you have the previous head of the prosecutor's office in jail, you have the previous president of the police force in jail, you have the chief of the inspection of the police force who is now going to jail, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, we are far from saying that we have solved our problems with the rule of law. We haven't. We have just, hid them under the carpet, and now they have resurfaced.
Yeah, it's a process. You can take shortcuts for a certain time, but then they return to you. So it's it's a temporary shortcut, let's say. Well, thank you. If there are no, we have gone over time. If I don't know if we have.
I see one question or comment in the chat room, but it's also in Albanian.
Yeah. Okay, we have one in English.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Regarding
of the institutions of the EU and the approach that the media to the approach of media towards the information sources. Personally, I have some contacts in Brussels, and I have established them thanks to such trainings. And there is no institution, proper institution, that handles issues that are solely related to the integration process and the media education. So this was just an explanation coming from the participants. And you have the last question in English.
Yes, and I see also two hands raised from participants. I don't know if they.
We can take all the questions and then Arbana atëre, shoh që keni ngritur dorën, po. Si u dëgjojmë mirë, nuk ju dëgjojmë.
I believe. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation that you made. It's very, I would say, to the ground. It's very realistic, and we really need to take our steps, not only leave it on the hands of the politicians to do it. We as citizens need to take our steps in the process and be part of the process. And how can we do it? I think that and I will take on take my word on the media that you presented. I think that by making media a part of us, I mean, they can be transparent on giving the reality regarding the public services, regarding the real life of the citizens, I mean, reflecting the real life as it is. Unfortunately, we have many media in Albania that are not apolitical. So I think that they should, or sometimes they are very much in line with the interests of their owners, of the media owners. So the journalists are not quite free to give their stance and their opinions, but they follow the line of the owners. And the line of the owners is in compliance with the politicians. So it is more or less left in the hand of the politicians. If the media is not transparent on the whole process, and they do not give, detailed and transparent information regarding the process of integration of Albania into the EU, then it is left in the hand of the politicians. And as I see from my perception, then it goes from one political party. So the ball goes from one political party to the other political party, and they fight together literally, they fight together in order to who holds the flag first for being the first one to get Albania into EU, and who takes more credits to what they do accordingly. So the perception of the people, of the real people in the streets, in the markets, in schools, even in administration, is that it's only left in the hands of the politicians. And that's why I emphasize the fact that the media should be more qualified in this aspect. So they should have, I would say that they should go for advocacy in terms of being part of a media strategy. So the government should take a national media strategy. They should write it together with the media and with the groups of interest because the process of Albania into the EU will be long. So I mean, it will take longer. That's why we need to have media on our side and not leave it only in the hands of the politicians. I know that decisions, high-level decisions, are made by political negotiations and politicians, but we need to do our part. We need to do our thing. Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you, Arbana. Erikajo, now I see that përshëndetje, mund të bëni pyetje nëse komentin.
Përshëndetje. Hello everybody, thank you for the invitation. And Mr. Geist, thank you for your presentation. Now mine is not so much as a question as much as a comment. Of course, Albania, within Albania, EU has very high, let's say, support, enjoys very high support. And its citizens are very pro-European and Euroscepticism runs very low. However, as someone who studies the region and sadly, I have stated as well, because we have to address the elephant in the room, I believe, that this support is not translated equally in concrete support and engaging in shaping, let's say, the public debate on behalf of the citizens, of the civil society, okay, but there are organizations, NGOs, but mainly the citizenry is not so much engaging into, let's say, influencing or pressuring the government to move on with the much needed reforms, not just to join the EU, but because the country needs them in order to improve the standard of life and everything. Therefore, here we come to the role of the media, which indeed there are many TV stations and newspapers and online media outlets and so on and so forth. However, the quality runs very low and the debate is very polarized and much away from the very substance of the issue. The ones that are, let's say, pro-government praise the government, ones that are, let's say, in opposition exercise critique to the government, however, without a real substance, I would like to stress. So, I believe that something must be done in this time. The civil society must take the initiative to inform and to make this process, let's say, to make this process, the integration process, into a larger civil, let's say, a social movement on its own right. Thank you.
Thank you. Now there are more comments, but you can address them in all of them. Yes. On also the question that we have here from Benedetta regarding the youth communities.
I will do that, I'll take the first one on the trainings and informal contacts as the last one, because I think it partly answers some of the comments or questions raised by the others. So first, let me start with the youth communities and their role in the integration process. Of course, I think it's important. I used to have my share in the youth politics before we have entered the EU, and then I have realized that politics is not for me, and I went for working in media for the rest of my professional life. Anyway, it was a great time, and I think youth communities, and now it could be different youth organizations, from youth organizations of political parties to whatever NGOs or other youth organizations, if they have kind of international contacts, international activities, they are an important way for training of future social, political, economic leaders or people who will be active in their areas of life and who will in the future, in whatever they do, look beyond the, small local or national horizon. It doesn't mean that they will not do activities that are locally important. They can do that. They can work for some kind of community. But even if they work for a small community somewhere in the region, they can still have a broader outlook. And this is, I think, an important role that the youth organizations are playing. Of course, we can be skeptical. Youth organizations of political parties, they are just, ladder steps in the political career, but it doesn't have to work so. And still, even if it is so, I prefer people who had some kind of education, let's say, this kind of informal education, than those who had just joined politics, and go there to, make a career or something like that, because they think it's economically beneficial. So I think youth communities, youth organizations from other countries, and especially their cooperation with your youth organizations and communities in Albania play important role in the preparation of the country for the membership during the accession negotiations, of course, but also especially for the preparation of the membership, because they usually they are preparing people who then take some kind of responsibility role in different areas of life in future. So that would be my my reaction to that, and that's why I also think that kind of public support, state support, funding of youth organizations is important. Of course, it has to be a well-functioning system which provides funding for meaningful activities and not funding for activities that have political support, but it's important. Now, going to media, you have mentioned that many of the media in Romania are political. They actually play in line with the interests of their owners and ultimately politicians that the owners are supporting. Again, this is not specific in Albania. It's happening in many other countries. I have mentioned Italy. I've mentioned Czech Republic. It was to an extent the case also in Slovakia. Not so profound, but yes. Now, I think this problem has two levels. One is the objectivity of the media. I mean, I have to say I have no problem with media who have some specific political position on some issues. When I go to France and I'm conservative, I read Le Figaro, or if I'm a leftist, I read L'Humanité, or I read Libération when I'm kind of left liberal, whatever. So this is fine. I mean, media sector, healthy media sector in many countries has worked like that. I don't see any problem with that because, first of all, as I said, I don't believe that media are just a mirror for the reality. They are a critical mirror. They should have some opinion or try to explain things, not only to report on things. And when they do that, I think it's good if it's transparent. So if you read something in Libération, a commentary, or if you read a commentary in The Guardian, you know that it's a kind of centrist liberal, left liberal point of view. It's fine. You are either fine with that and you read it, or you are not fine with that and you buy other newspaper, or you buy that newspaper and read it because you want to argue with that. It's full transparency. And this is, I think, how it should work. Of course, these media should be open. Probably they should provide some kind of platform for discussion of different worldviews. That's fine, but still they could have some, let's say, position on important things. and it's not affecting media objectivity. There is a second level, which is more serious, and here I agree with you, and it's a level of objectivity, meaning not following or not fighting for some kind of group or individual interests, either of owners or political parties. Again, we cannot prevent it. Media have their owners. In some cases, there is a wall between the owner and the editorial office. In some cases, there is not. The only thing we can do with that is to build or to increase transparency as much as possible. Now, this is again an area where we haven't really succeeded in Slovakia for a long time, and only now we are actively discussing who is owning what and how it's influencing the content of the media. You cannot probably prevent somebody from buying a stake in media, but you can have some laws that increase transparency, and you can have public pressure that demands transparency. And then talking about politicians, yes, I mean, time and often you would hear politicians saying that they are the ones who are taking responsibility, they have democratic legitimacy to make decisions and so on. So those NGOs that are not elected by anybody, they shouldn't try to replace them. I mean, that's a red herring. Nobody's trying to replace politicians. Nobody's trying to take their responsibility. They have it, and they will, face consequences if they don't fulfill their role, and so, or they should face consequences if they don't fulfill their role. They have democratic legitimacy to take decisions, but they should also have an interest in these decisions being transparent and effective. And if they do, they should try to consult them with stakeholders, with civil society, and they should be transparent to media to report them. So when this is quite often what we hear here in Slovakia, when there is a demand for greater transparency and consultation in political decisions, politicians say, well, we are the one who make decisions because we have won elections. If you want a change, contest the elections and win, and you can. This is not how it works. I mean, there are many other legitimate ways how you can and should influence the political process. And in a liberal democracy, politicians should be also open to these, let's say, consultations, informal and so on. Now, regarding the quality of media, yes, again, it's also a problem here in Slovakia. Low quality of media. As I said, it's to a large extent a matter of resources, but also something, let's call it a political culture. I think Balkan countries. I don't know situation in Albania so well, but I know situation in, let's say, ex-Yugoslav countries, and I think there are many interesting journalistic projects there, many more than in Central Europe. Independent journalistic projects, smaller projects. So there is lots of talent. I mean, there is a drive to find some kind of sustainable, independent media. So this creates opportunities, but of course you are always fighting for resources. And now getting to the first point or question, I think in the way of to increase the quality of reporting, the quality of journalism, for this, those trainings and informal contacts are crucial. And this is something which I believe distinguishes somebody who wants to be a journalist and wants to do it as probably kind of a public service from somebody who sees journalism as a step in the career. If you are a journalist and you want to be active in the media and help them to fulfill their public role, then you are building your informal contacts. You are trying to collect information from different sources and so on. building partnerships. If it's just a step in your career, you are building contacts with your future employers, be it in corporations or public institutions or politicians.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gaze. We are now really over time, but it was very interesting, the topics, and especially the media, how it interferes and touches upon many issues of the process. So I'd like to thank you for participating and for your presentation and answers and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope to have you again in any other activities we are going to organize in the future. And I would also like to thank now the Ministry of Justice for organizing and helping to organize this event. The director Hoja, also Ms. Nayada Shondi, who facilitated all of preparations to this activity, and we look forward to other sessions in this working group, but also in other working groups. Many thanks for your time and for your engagement. We wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I wish you all the best. It will be a long journey, and I really hope that it will be successful.
Many thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.